The night sky above the forest world of burned with a strange light. Princess stood on the wooden platform outside her dwelling and watched the streak of fire cut across the darkness. It was not a falling star. She had seen those many times before. This was something different. This was something that screamed as it fell, leaving a trail of smoke and sparks that painted the clouds orange and red. The object crashed beyond the ridge of the western mountains. The sound reached the village a moment later, a deep boom that shook the trees and sent night birds scattering into the sky. Gripped the railing and felt her heart pound against her chest. In all her 20 seasons of life, she had never seen anything like this. Her people, emerged from their homes with fear written on their tall faces. They stood nearly 12 feet high, with long limbs and silver-blue skin that caught the moonlight. Their eyes were large and made for seeing in darkness, and right now every eye in the village was fixed on the glowing horizon where the fallen thing had landed. Chieftain, her father, climbed the platform to stand beside her. He was old now, his silver hair tied back in the traditional braids of leadership, but his body was still strong and his mind was still sharp. He looked at the distant glow and his expression grew troubled. "We do not go to investigate such things," he said in his deep voice. "The old laws are clear. What falls from the sky belongs to the sky gods. It is not meant for our hands." Understood the old laws. She had learned them since childhood, but something pulled at her tonight, a feeling she could not explain. It was like a thread tied around her heart, and the other end of that thread was somewhere out there in the burning forest. "Father," she said softly, "what if someone is hurt? What if something needs our help?" Looked at his daughter with eyes that held both love and warning. "The sky does not send us gifts, child. It sends us tests. Whatever has fallen out there is not our concern." But could not shake the feeling. She lay awake in her dwelling long after the village had gone silent. The glow on the horizon faded slowly as the fires burned themselves out. By the time the first light of morning touched the treetops, she had made her decision. She gathered 3 hunters who were loyal to her. There was a young male with quick feet and steady hands. There was a female warrior who had protected since childhood. And there was Old, who knew the western paths better than anyone alive. Together, they slipped out of the village before the sun had fully risen. The journey took most of the day. The forest grew thicker as they traveled west, and the air grew heavy with the smell of smoke and burned wood. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a clearing that had not existed before yesterday. The trees here had been flattened in a wide circle, knocked down by the force of whatever had struck the ground. At the center of the destruction sat a strange object. It was made of metal, though a kind of metal had never seen before. It was smooth and gray and shaped like a seed pod, though much larger than any seed she knew. Smoke still rose from cracks in its surface, and strange lights blinked weakly along one side. Drew his bow, gripped her spear. Old whispered prayers to the forest spirits, but walked forward, her curiosity stronger than her fear. The metal pod had a hole in its side, torn open by the impact. Crouched down and looked inside. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. There was a creature inside. It was small, impossibly small, barely reaching 4 feet in height even if it had been standing. Its skin was a strange pinkish color, and its body was covered in torn fabric of a kind she did not recognize. Dark hair grew from the top of its round head. Its eyes were closed, and blood seeped from a wound on its forehead. "What is it?" whispered from behind her. Did not answer. She reached into the pod and touched the creature gently. Its skin was warm. Its chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. It was alive. "We should kill it," said nervously. "We do not know what it is. It could be dangerous." "Look at it," replied without turning around. "It is the size of a child. It is wounded and helpless. How could this small thing be dangerous to us?" She lifted the creature carefully from the wreckage. It weighed almost nothing in her arms. Its head rolled against her shoulder, and she felt its weak breath against her neck. Something stirred in her chest, a protective instinct she had only ever felt for the young ones of her tribe. "I am taking it back to the village," she announced. Old shook his head slowly. "The chieftain will not approve. The elders will demand its death. You know the old ways, princess. Strange creatures are not welcome among us." Stood tall with the small being cradled against her body. "Then I will claim it under the law of foundkin. Whatever I find in the wild and bring home under my protection becomes my responsibility. The elders cannot argue with that." It was an old law, one that had not been used in many generations. But it was still law, and knew her father would have to honor it even if he disagreed. They made the journey back to the village in silence. Word spread quickly once they arrived, gathered around as she carried her strange burden through the streets. She heard their whispers and saw their fearful faces. Some made signs to ward off evil spirits. Others simply stared with wide eyes at the tiny creature in their princess's arms. Chieftain met her at the entrance to her dwelling. His face was hard with anger and something that might have been fear. "What have you done, daughter?" he demanded. "I have claimed a foundkin," she answered calmly, "as is my right under the old laws." Before he could respond, the creature in her arms stirred. Its eyes opened slowly and found herself looking into a gaze unlike any she had ever seen. The eyes were small compared to her own, but they held a depth and an intelligence that surprised her. They were dark brown, almost black, and they looked up at her with confusion and fear and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. The creature opened its mouth and made sounds she did not understand. Its voice was strange, pitched higher than any male. It struggled weakly in her arms, then seemed to realize it was too injured to fight. It went still and simply stared at her, waiting to see what she would do. Looked down at the tiny being that had fallen from the stars. She did not know what it was or where it came from or why it had landed on her world. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to let anyone hurt it. Cole woke in a cage made of thick wooden bars. His head pounded with pain, and his body ached in places he did not know could ache. He sat up slowly and looked around at his prison. The cage was large enough for him to stand and walk a few steps in any direction, but the spaces between the bars were too narrow for him to squeeze through. Beyond the bars, he saw a world that made no sense. Everything was too big. The room around him had ceilings that stretched impossibly high. The furniture was sized for giants, and the beings who came to stare at him through the bars were creatures from a nightmare he had never imagined. They were tall, so tall that Cole had to crane his neck to see their faces. Their skin was silver blue and their eyes were enormous, like the eyes of owls but set in faces that were almost human. They moved with a strange grace, their long limbs bending in ways that seemed wrong, and they looked at him like he was a bug trapped under glass. Cole remembered the crash. He remembered the warning lights in his escape pod and the screaming of metal as he fell through the atmosphere. He remembered thinking that this was how he was going to die, alone and far from home on a routine scouting mission gone wrong. But somehow he had survived. Somehow he had landed on a planet with intelligent life. And now those intelligent beings were keeping him in a cage like an animal. Days passed. Cole learned quickly that his captors were not cruel exactly, but they were afraid of him. They brought him food twice a day, pushing wooden bowls through a slot at the bottom of his cage. The food was always plants, leaves and berries and some kind of root vegetable that tasted like cardboard. His stomach growled constantly, and he grew weaker by the day. One of the giants came more often than the others. It was a female, he thought, though he was not entirely sure how he knew that. She was younger than most of them, with silver eyes that caught the light in a way that reminded him of moonlight on water. She did not look at him with fear or disgust. She looked at him with curiosity. She tried to communicate with him. She pointed at things and said words in her strange language. She pointed at herself and said something that sounded like. Cole repeated the name, and something like a smile crossed her face. He pointed at himself. "Cole," he said. "Cole," she repeated carefully. Her voice was deep like all of them, but there was a softness to it that the others lacked. Over the following days, they taught each other words. Cole learned that the giants called themselves. He learned that was someone important, a princess of some kind. He learned the words for food and water and sleep and sky. In return, he told her about Earth. He drew pictures in the dirt floor of his cage, showing her the planet he came from, the stars he had traveled through, the ship he had been on before the accident. She watched with wide eyes as he tried to explain that there were other worlds beyond the sky, that the darkness above their heads was filled with burning suns and countless planets. She did not believe him at first. He could see it in her face. Her people thought the sky was a ceiling, a dome painted by their gods. The idea that it went on forever, that it was filled with places like her own world, seemed to shake something deep inside her. But she kept coming back. She kept asking questions, and slowly Cole saw her understanding grow. Not everyone was happy about their communication. A male came sometimes to watch Cole through the bars. He was tall even by their standards, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Called him, and Cole understood from her tone that this was her brother. looked at Cole the way a man might look at a rat in his kitchen, with disgust, with the desire to crush. The worst day came when Cole could not hide his hunger anymore. He had eaten nothing but plants for nearly 2 weeks and his body was beginning to fail. He needed protein. He needed meat. When brought his food that morning, Cole pointed at the bowl and shook his head. He opened his mouth and pointed at his teeth, the sharp ones near the front. He made a gesture like tearing with his jaw. It took a long time for her to understand. When she finally did, the look on her face was one of pure horror. She spoke rapidly to the guards outside his cage. They responded with sounds of revulsion. Cole heard a word repeated over and over, a word that sounded like. He did not know what it meant, but he understood from their faces that it was not good. Left without looking at him, she did not return for 3 days. When she finally came back, she brought a small bundle wrapped in leaves. She pushed it through the slot with shaking hands and stepped back quickly, as if she was afraid to be too close to him. Cole opened the bundle and found meat inside. It was cooked, barely, and it was some kind of small animal he did not recognize. But it was meat. He ate it quickly, feeling strength return to his body with every bite. When he finished, he looked up at. She was watching him with an expression he could not read. Fear, yes, but also fascination, and something else underneath, something that looked almost like respect. She said quietly, "Blood-eater beastkin." Cole nodded slowly. He understood now. These beings, did not eat meat. They were plant-eaters, prey animals in the language of nature, and he was something else, something that ate other living things to survive. Something that hunted. From that day forward, brought him meat in secret. She never stayed to watch him eat it, but she kept coming back, kept talking to him, kept teaching him her language and learning his. One evening, as the sun was setting beyond the high windows of his prison, came to his cage with a troubled expression. She spoke quickly in her language, and Cole understood enough words to piece together the meaning. Hunters dead, monster in the forest, something called a. The village was in danger, they were afraid, and somewhere out there in the darkening woods something was hunting the hunters. Cole gripped the bars of his cage and looked up at. For the first time since he crashed on this world, he felt something other than fear and desperation. He felt purpose. "Let me out," he said in her language. "I can help." She stared at him like he had lost his mind. He was tiny. He was weak. He was a blood-eating beast that could barely reach her waist. But Cole knew something she did not. He knew what humans were. He knew what his species had done for millions of years before they ever reached the stars. Humans were not prey. Humans had never been prey. Humans were predators, and predators knew how to hunt. They killed 4 more hunters before the week was over. Cole watched the funerals from his cage, saw them carry their dead through the village streets with wailing cries that echoed off the tall trees. The bodies were wrapped in white cloth, and even from a distance, Cole could see the terrible wounds that had ended their lives. Great slashing cuts across chests and throats, bite marks from jaws that could crush bone. Whatever was out there in the forest, it was big, and it was hungry. The village lived in fear. They stayed inside their homes after dark. They traveled only in large groups during the day. Their warriors stood guard on the walls with spears and bows, but everyone knew the truth. Their weapons were made for hunting small game and defending against other tribes. They were not made for fighting something like the. Cole spent his days watching and thinking. He asked questions about the creature whenever she visited. She told him what her people knew. There was a legend that had become real. It was a beast from the deep forest, a thing that emerged once in a generation to feast on the before disappearing back into the wilderness. No one had ever killed one. No one had ever fought one and survived. "How big?" Cole asked in his broken version of her language. Spread her arms wide. "Bigger than 3 of us together, 4 legs, many teeth, eyes that see in darkness." "Does it climb? Does it swim? Does it dig?" She looked confused by his questions. "It walks, it runs, it kills. That is all we know." It was not enough, but Cole worked with what he had. He sketched the creature based on her descriptions, trying to understand what he might be dealing with. Some kind of large predator, probably territorial, probably hunting because they had built their village in its territory. These attacks were not random. This was a creature defending its home, which meant it would keep killing until there was no one left to kill. Cole told about his idea again. He asked her to let him out. He promised he could help. She shook her head and walked away without answering. But she came back that night after everyone else was asleep. She carried a key made of carved bone and a bundle of tools wrapped in leather. Her hands shook as she opened his cage, and she kept looking over her shoulder like she expected guards to appear at any moment. "Why?" Cole asked as he stepped out of his prison for the first time in weeks. The floor felt strange under his feet after so long in the cage. His legs were weak, but they held him. Knelt down so her face was closer to his level. In the dim light of the room, her silver eyes looked almost white. "My father is a good chieftain," she said slowly, choosing words he could understand. "But he is also stubborn. He will not ask for help from something he does not understand. My brother wants to kill you. The elders think you are bad luck. But I have watched you, Cole. I have seen how you think. You are different from us, maybe different in the way we need." She led him to a small storage room behind the main hall. Inside were tools of all kinds: axes for cutting wood, knives for preparing food, rope made from woven plant fibers. Cole looked at the collection and felt something wake up inside him, something old, something that had been sleeping in the blood of his ancestors since before humans had words. He got to work. Watched him through the night. She watched him select a long straight branch and begin shaping it with a stone knife. She watched him tie a shorter piece of sharpened bone to the end, creating a point. She watched him twist plant fibers into a strong cord and bend a curved branch into a shape she did not recognize. "What is that?" she asked. "A bow," Cole answered, "for throwing small spears very fast and very far. We have bows for hunting small game." Cole smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "This is not for small game." By morning he had a spear, a bow, a quiver of arrows, and 3 simple traps made from rope and wooden stakes. His hands were raw and bleeding from the work, but his eyes were bright with a focus had never seen before. She looked at the weapons laid out on the floor. She looked at the small creature who had made them. And for the first time, she began to understand that she had made a mistake in her thinking. She had assumed Cole was harmless because he was small. She had assumed he was weak because he was soft. She had protected him the way she would protect a child or a pet, something helpless that needed her care. But the thing standing before her now was not helpless. The thing holding a spear and testing its weight was not a child or a pet. There was something in his eyes that made her blood run cold, a look she had never seen in any, a look that did not belong on the face of any creature that had ever been hunted. This was the look of something that did the hunting. "Stay inside the walls tonight," Cole said. "All of your people. No one goes out for any reason." "What are you going to do?" Cole looked toward the window where the first light of day was beginning to show. Beyond the glass, the forest waited, dark and deep and full of something that thought it was the most dangerous thing in these woods. It was wrong. "I am going to find your monster," Cole said, "and I am going to teach it what my kind has taught every other predator we have ever met." "What is that?" Cole picked up his spear and slung his bow across his back. He walked to the door of the storage room and paused with his hand on the handle. When he turned to look at, she saw something in his face that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Fear," he said simply. "I am going to teach it fear." He slipped out into the early morning darkness, stood in the doorway and watched him go, this tiny creature walking alone toward a nightmare that had killed the strongest warriors her tribe had ever produced. She should have felt pity. She should have felt certain that she would never see him again. Instead, she felt something she had never expected to feel for a being so small. She felt afraid for the forest at night was a different world. Sounds that seemed ordinary during the day became strange and threatening in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves could be danger. Every snap of a twig could mean death. They feared this darkness because they could not control it. They built walls and lit fires and stayed together in groups because the night belonged to things that hunted. Cole walked through it alone. He moved quietly, the way his father had taught him during camping trips on Earth a lifetime ago. He placed each foot carefully, testing the ground before putting his weight down. He kept his breathing slow and even. He listened with every part of his being, not just his ears but his whole body, feeling the forest around him the way a fish feels the water. He found the first signs of the within an hour, tracks in the soft earth, each print larger than his entire torso. Claw marks on the bark of trees where the creature had sharpened its weapons. The remains of a kill, bones picked clean and scattered across a small clearing. Cole studied everything. He built a picture in his mind of what he was hunting, a territorial predator that marked its boundaries, a creature of habit that used the same paths again and again, something confident, something that had never met a threat it could not kill. That confidence would be its weakness. He set his traps along the paths the creature favored. Simple designs, rope and stakes and trigger mechanisms that would hold something large for just a moment. Not long enough to kill it, just long enough to slow it down, just long enough to make it angry. Then he found a place to wait. He climbed a tree and settled into a fork between two thick branches. He was small enough that the leaves hid him completely. He was patient enough to stay perfectly still for hours, and he was human enough to know that the best predators did not charge into battle. The best predators waited for their prey to come to them. The moon rose and fell. The stars wheeled overhead. The forest made its sounds of night, the calls of creatures and the whisper of wind through leaves. Cole waited. They came just before dawn. He heard it before he saw it. A deep rumbling sound that was not quite a growl, more like the purr of some massive engine made of muscle and bone. Then he saw movement in the shadows below, something huge sliding between the trees with terrible grace. Had described it well, but descriptions could not capture the reality of the thing. It was massive, easily the size of a small truck, covered in dark scales that seemed to drink the moonlight. 4 thick legs carried it forward without a sound. Its head was a nightmare of teeth and eyes, 3 pairs of them that glowed faintly yellow in the darkness. It was the most dangerous thing Cole had ever seen in his life. It was magnificent. The creature paused near the first trap. Its nostrils flared as it caught a strange scent on the air. Something new, something it had never smelled before. Cole watched it investigate, watched its massive head swing back and forth as it tried to understand what this new thing in its territory might be. Then it stepped on the trigger, and the trap closed around its front leg. It screamed. It was a sound that shook leaves from trees and sent night birds scattering across the sky. The creature thrashed against the ropes, tearing them apart in seconds, but those seconds were enough. Cole was already moving, dropping from his tree and running through the undergrowth toward his next position. It caught his scent. He felt its attention shift toward him, felt those 6 yellow eyes lock onto his fleeing form. It roared and charged after him, crashing through the forest like a living storm. This was the moment. This was where it would die, caught in the open by something faster and stronger and more deadly than anything they could face. This was where the hunters had fallen, one after another, because they did not know how to fight something they could not defeat in a fair battle. But humans had never fought fair. That was not how they had conquered their world. That was not how they had reached the stars. Cole led the into his second trap. This one caught its back leg, jerking it off balance. It crashed to the ground with an impact that Cole felt through his feet. He spun and drew his bow, put an arrow to the string, and released. The arrow flew true. It buried itself in the creature's shoulder, not deep enough to kill but deep enough to hurt. The screamed again, scrambled to its feet, and charged. Cole ran. He ran faster than he had ever run before, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He ducked under fallen logs, squeezed through gaps in the undergrowth that the massive creature could not follow. He led it on a winding path through the forest, firing arrows whenever he had a clear shot, never letting it rest, never letting it recover. It began to slow. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. Its breath came in ragged gasps. It had never experienced this before. It had never been the one being hunted. It had never felt pain and exhaustion and the terrible realization that something else was in control. Cole led it to the killing ground. It was a small ravine with steep sides, too narrow for the creature to turn around. Cole had found it during his earlier scouting and knew it would be perfect. He ran down into the ravine and stopped at the far end, turning to face the creature that followed him. It came down after him. Its eyes blazed with fury and pain. Its jaws opened wide, showing rows of teeth that could crush bone like paper. It was going to kill him. It was going to tear him apart and eat him piece by piece. It charged. Cole planted his feet and raised his spear. He aimed for the spot just behind the jaw, where the scales were thinner. He watched the massive creature come toward him, filling his entire world with teeth and rage. At the last possible moment, he dove to the side. It could not stop. Its momentum carried it forward into the wall of the ravine. Cole's spear, braced against the ground, drove deep into its throat. The creature's own weight and speed pushed the weapon through scales and muscle and into the vital organs beneath. It collapsed. It twitched once, twice. Its 6 yellow eyes stared at Cole with something that might have been confusion. Then the light faded from them and the forest fell silent. Cole sat down heavily on the ground. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. He had never killed anything so large before. He had never fought anything so dangerous. He had come within inches of death a dozen times in the past hour. And he had won. He rested for a while, letting his heart slow and his breathing return to normal. Then he got up and did what needed to be done. He cut the head from this body. It took a long time and it was brutal work. When he finished, he tied a rope around it and began to drag. He walked out of the forest as the sun rose over the mountains. He walked across the open fields toward the village walls. He walked slowly, deliberately, pulling his trophy behind him. The on the walls saw him coming. He heard their shouts of disbelief. He heard their cries of fear and wonder. He did not look up at them. He just kept walking until he reached the village gates. Then he dropped the head of the in the dirt. He looked up at the faces staring down at him. He saw Chieftain with his mouth hanging open. He saw Prince with hatred and fear battling in his eyes. He saw the warriors who had refused to face this creature now looking at its severed head. And he saw. She stood on the wall above the gates, her silver eyes wide, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She looked at the dead creature. She looked at the small being who had killed it, and Cole saw something change in her face. She was looking at him like she had never really seen him before. Maybe she had not. Maybe none of them had. They had seen something small and soft and assumed it was weak. They had seen something different and assumed it was lesser. They were beginning to understand how wrong they had been. The village did not know what to do with Cole after that night. The cage was clearly no longer appropriate. He had killed the thing that killed their strongest warriors. He had done what none of them could do. Treating him like a prisoner or a pet seemed almost insulting now. But they did not know what else he could be. Some of the younger wanted to worship him. They left offerings outside his new quarters, small gifts of carved wood and woven cloth. They whispered his name with reverence and told stories about the night he walked into the forest alone. In their tales, he grew larger with each telling, more powerful, more terrifying. Others wanted him gone. Prince led this group, though he was careful to keep his voice quiet. He spoke of bad omens and dangerous outsiders. He reminded anyone who would listen that Cole was a blood-eater, a creature that consumed flesh to survive. Today he had killed tomorrow he might decide to hunt something else. Chieftain said nothing. He watched Cole with thoughtful eyes and kept his own counsel. Whatever he was thinking, he did not share it with anyone. Came to see Cole every day. She no longer had to sneak or hide. Her claim of foundkin was still in effect, and after what Cole had done, no one dared to challenge it. They walked together through the village, the tall princess and the tiny alien, and everywhere they went, they stepped aside to let them pass. "They are afraid of you now," said one afternoon, as they sat by the river that ran behind the village. Cole watched the water flow over smooth stones. "Yes." "Does that bother you?" He thought about the question for a long time before answering. "On my world, we have a saying, it is better to be feared than to be helpless. Fear is uncomfortable, but helplessness is death." Considered this. She had never thought about fear that way before. To her people, fear was something to avoid, to run from, to hide from behind walls and weapons. The idea that fear could be a kind of protection was strange to her. But then again, many things about Cole were strange to her. She found herself watching him more closely as the days passed. She noticed the way he moved, always alert, always aware of his surroundings. She noticed the way he looked at things, studying them like he was learning their secrets. She noticed the way his eyes changed when he talked about his home world, going soft with a sadness that he tried to hide. She noticed, too, that she felt different when she was around him. Her heart beat faster. Her skin felt warm. She wanted to be near him, wanted to hear his voice, wanted to understand the strange thoughts that moved behind his strange eyes. It was confusing. It was frightening in its own way. It was undeniable. 3 weeks after the night of the hunt, something changed. Cole had been working on the wreckage of his escape pod, salvaging parts and rebuilding systems that did not understand. One evening, he came to find her with an expression she could not read. "My beacon is working again," he said. "I have sent a signal. A ship from my people will arrive in 3 days." Felt something cold settle in her chest. "You are leaving." "I can leave," Cole corrected. "That is not the same thing." They walked together to the crater where had first found him. The metal pod still lay there, its surface now stripped of useful parts. The ground around it had begun to grow back, green shoots pushing up through the burned earth. Life was returning. "Why did you help us?" asked. "We kept you in a cage. We treated you like an animal. My brother wanted to kill you. You owed us nothing." Cole sat on a rock and looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. So many stars, so many worlds, and somewhere up there a ship was coming to take him home. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "we have learned something important. We have learned that the universe is very large and very cold and very empty. We have learned that life is rare and precious. And we have learned that when you find something precious, you protect it, even if it is different from you, even if it is afraid of you, even if it keeps you in a cage." He looked at, in the fading light, his small eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Your people treated me badly because they were scared. I understand fear. I do not hold it against them. And when they came, I helped because I could. Because helping is what my kind does when we find something worth protecting." "Is that all?" asked quietly. "You helped because you could. There was no other reason." Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small expression that transformed his alien face into something almost gentle. "There was another reason," he admitted. "A princess with silver eyes pulled me from a burning wreck when everyone else wanted to leave me to die. She brought me food when I was starving. She talked to me when I was alone. She saw me as something more than a beast or a curiosity." He stood and walked closer to her. He barely reached her waist, this tiny creature who had killed a nightmare. He looked up at her with those strange, dark eyes that held so much more than she had ever expected. "I helped because of you. I stayed alive because of you. And now that my people are coming, I find that I do not want to leave you." The ship arrived 3 days later. It descended from the sky in a blaze of light, much larger than Cole's escape pod, carrying beings that looked like him but felt completely different. They wore uniforms and carried devices and spoke in quick voices full of relief and questions. They wanted Cole to come with them. They had been searching for him for months. His family was waiting. His world was waiting. Everything he had known before the crash was waiting for him to return. Cole stood at the edge of the village and looked at the ship that would take him home. He looked at the humans who had come to rescue him. Then he looked back at the who had gathered to watch. At Chieftain, who stood with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. At Prince, who looked relieved that the strange creature was finally leaving. At who stood apart from the others, with tears running down her silver-blue face. Cole walked to his people. He spoke to them in his own language for a long time. There were arguments. There were raised voices. There were expressions of confusion and disbelief. Then Cole walked back to the village. He walked past the gates and through the streets and stopped in front of. He looked up at her with a peace in his eyes that had not been there before. "I told them I am not coming," he said. "I told them to mark this world as protected. No one will bother your people. You have my word." "You are staying," whispered. "I am staying." The ship rose into the sky and disappeared among the stars. Cole watched it go without regret. Then he turned to face the tribe that had once kept him in a cage and now looked at him with wonder and fear, and something that might be growing into respect. Chieftain stepped forward. For a long moment, he simply stared at the tiny being who had killed their nightmare and then chosen to remain. "What are you?" the chieftain asked. Cole smiled. It was not a gentle smile this time. It was the smile of something that had clawed its way to the top of the food chain on a world full of things trying to kill it. It was the smile of a predator at rest. "I am human," he said, "and I am here to stay." Reached down and took his small hand in her large one. The touch felt natural. It felt right. It felt like the beginning of something that neither of them could have predicted, but both of them had been moving toward since the moment she pulled him from the burning wreckage. The tribe would call him many names in the years to come. Beast Killer, the small death that walks, but had her own name for him, spoken only in quiet moments when no one else could hear. She called him hers. And he was.